I'm Alfonso Winker.
And I'm Trina Olson. And together, we're the co-founders of Team Dynamics.
And this is Behave. Good morning. How many of you, by show of hands or clapping or shouting, have participated in a protest or a march? How many of you have voted for something in your faith community in an electoral way as part of a board you're on? And how many of you would say you identify as part of a movement for social change? My name is Alfonso Winker. I use he and him pronouns. I'm president and co-founder of Team Dynamics. 14 years ago, I met my friend and movement fam and mentor, Beth Zemsky. She had recently finished her Bush Fellowship, where she studied social movement organizations and how social change came about through movements, and helped me understand, and the colleagues that I was doing queer campus organizing with, understand the difference between daily actions and our tactics and how to situate ourselves inside of a larger movement. And I've always tried to reteach that stuff, not as well as Beth, but I've always tried to sort of pay it forward and bring her learning to other folks. And when Trina and I were thinking about the contribution that Team Dynamics could make to the movement space, we thought, what if we could take Beth's fabulous research and work and decades in social justice movements and turn it into a video. So you all get a special treat today. You get to see the world premiere of just a snapshot of the work that Beth has done when she was a Bush Fellow and for decades in justice movements.
Test.
All of my childhood Ricky Lake, Sally Jesse Raphael dreams are coming true right now.
This is the moment you were born for.
Yeah. I live and breathe for this. We're so excited to be here. You are now participating in a live recording of our podcast, Behave. Behave is a production of Team Dynamics. Trina and I co-founded that company 3 years ago, and we focus on workplaces. We believe that going to work in the United States and its colonies can be fundamentally different, and the way that we can be different is by talking more about our experiences of race and gender at work, because it's not naughty, it's not disrespectful, it's absolutely essential to our work. And the title of this segment of Pollen Live is Somebody Should Do Something About That. And the way the three of us think about that is through three questions. What is my role? What is my goal? And how do I get there without losing my soul? Each of us has a role in movements. It's not someone else's job. So to what do you feel responsible? Or what do people expect from you? The second is, what is my goal? What tangible, specific thing will be better or different by my participation in this movement? And the third question, how do I get there without losing my soul? Justice work isn't haphazard, and it's not free-for-all. It's focused. And so how are your behaviors going to align with your values so that you accidentally don't cross your own boundaries?
Good morning. I'm Trina Olson. I am the other co-founder of Team Dynamics and our CEO. It is my favorite thing to do currently to co-host this podcast. And the reason why is I love being based here in Minnesota and doing national work, because I think here at home, we have done so much values clarification work. And now it's time to say, so what? Now what? So our podcast is called Behave because I care a lot about how you think. I care even more about how you behave. And so we work really hard to create actionable items. We really think of ourselves as the tacticians of the movement, and we have been in movement spaces for a long time. So are thrilled to be here and are so excited to not only have our first live audience. We usually have an audience of one. That's Levi. Levi's our producer. Yeah. And we've been trying to do that recording thing, kind of like how folks use a loop pedal where we have him clap in different ways and hoot and holler, but he still doesn't sound like a real good laugh track. So if you all want to bring some energy or some noise, it won't bother us at all. We also decided that being here with our partners at Pollen was the perfect time at the beginning of our second season of our podcast to have our very first guest. Oh. I know. Yep. We thought long and hard about how we were going to add to the conversation that Alfonso and I have been having. And so Beth came into my life 12 years ago. I came into movement building through campaign work. And because I was on the right side of justice, I was losing a lot. So I was part of campaigns when we were still talking about marriage equality as a sin. And we were getting our tails kicked every time. And it wasn't because our campaigns weren't good. It was because the world wasn't ready. And so Beth was part of the team that I was working on nationally to make sure that we, as campaigners and movement builders, were healthy enough to keep going. And so part of why I am thrilled to be here is I'm about 20 years into my career. I got about 20 years to go. I demand that in our lifetime, inequity in American workplaces becomes a thing of the past.
So I'm Beth Zemsky, and I'm super thrilled to be part of this conversation. You've heard a little bit about me. I don't really want to spend a whole lot more time introducing myself. I'd rather get into the content. But let me just say, by way of introduction, that I've been in the work for a while, a little longer than these. I just turned 60, which I'm proudly proclaiming, right? Okay. Because part of what we need to do is really think about how our movements build on the wisdom of our elders who have been through various parts of the movement, and knowing that we live in different historical moments with different things happening around us, how do we take all that knowledge and information and really, as Alfonso was saying, pay it forward? My career has been in various kinds of work. I've worked as a direct practice practitioner, as a psychotherapist. I've been a full-time community organizer. I've been at the University of Minnesota. Now I'm a consultant. I do intercultural organizational development and social change work. You can talk to me later about what that means, but essentially it means I don't have a job and I work all the time. Essentially what it means. But I'd rather get into the content, so I'll throw it back to you.
And before I get into the questions, I'm going to kind of do this interview style. I want to thank Jacqueline and the team at Next Day Animations for helping us bring this vision to life. They've been incredible partners. Benefit Corporation, Pollen sponsor, amazing women and women of color team over there. So you may have picked up that there are sort of three faces of a movement, and the Grassroots Policy Project talks about that as campaigns, infrastructure, and worldview. And so I want to talk to Trina and Beth about their experience in movements kind of through those doors of campaigns, infrastructure, and worldview. So Trina, campaigns, you've lived in 16 different cities, you've worked on healthcare, hunger, living wage, criminal justice, immigration reform. I'm trying to remember them all because like when Trina
When
says
you're
it.
progressive, you're like a mutt when it comes to, there's a lot of issues that we care about, yeah.
So when campaigns are at their peak, voters can be sort of activated about the issue. And on Behave, we talk about workplaces. And so a lot of voters are also workers. And so what is your perspective on sort of how folks get activated or itchy or motivated around the particular issue of campaigns, and specifically folks who are living a marginalized experience, women, queer and trans people, folks of color, undocumented folks, et cetera?
Yeah, so the reason we choose to focus on the American workplace, right, is that most of us spend the majority of our waking hours at work, right? And for any of us who are lucky enough to have our job be even remotely vocational, meaning we feel called to the mission, we feel called to the vision, our workplace is really important to us. And we also currently reside inside of a capitalist economy, which means that we need our workplaces to do certain things for us because it's not going to get done any other way. So as somebody who has worked on campaigns from both the vantage point of the campaign impacting me, so my body, my household, my family, and then from the vantage point of being an ally, this is not about me. I have never had this lived experience, but this seems wrong. Maybe I can help. I think what American workplaces are getting wrong is that folks are coming to work having looked at their phone, having experienced the news, And we are in a lot of pain because this isn't just, oh, the news is too much to take in. This is generationally, are people like me going to continue to experience sexual harassment like it's normal? Are people like us going to be so consistently underhired, underpaid, and underpromoted that one of the things we learned by being part of our Lunar Startups cohort, currently in the United States, there are more CEOs in Fortune 500 companies named Jeff than women. So something's really wrong, right? We are leaving our very best players, our best workers on the bench. And so part of what we try to lovingly say to a lot of folks who are getting engaged in campaigns for the first time, folks might be talking as though there has been no history before this moment, right? So they're like, you'll never believe it. I'm like, I totally believe it. This has absolutely happened before.
It's like it's predictable.
Yeah, right? Systemic injustice is predictable. And so we say, really late to the party, but super glad you're here, when folks are in that process of waking up, right? And so when we are experiencing this swirl, we are experiencing it from our own vantage point, and it means we're not doing the best job we could at asking each other questions. So rather than saying something like, how do you feel about how the caucuses went? You know, what's the conversation happening in your household about how the Democratic candidates remaining are almost entirely white? How are we talking about women still not being viable candidates? How is that feeling about how you feel about your leadership and your ability to contribute? Rather than saying, you guys, I saw the news, it felt like this, didn't it? To me. It felt like this to me. And so part of what we have to understand is whether or not we have water coolers anymore. I don't know if that's a thing. We have ambient water at ours. I don't even know what that does. I feel more powerful after I drink it, yeah. I think the thing we need to acknowledge, right, is that identity always matters, because we are walking around in our workplace having only ever experienced life inside our own bodies. So how we got treated at Target, how we got cut off in traffic, how we are thinking about how we are going to pay for our daughter's birthday party, right? And so I think we have this opportunity to really notice that something's being amplified during campaigns, but get way more curious about all the stuff under the surface, so that as workplaces you can say, okay, so how do we show up for you, with you? What are you afraid is going to happen if this ballot measure passes, or this one doesn't, or this candidate wins, or this one doesn't, or this movement gets sort of hijacked in the media, right? How can we as workplaces say we are ready to live our values through our behavior by having your back?
So you're talking about two things, and so I'm going to ask Beth to talk about sort of winning narratives. But Trina, you're pointing at two things. One, this idea that we have a profoundly personal experience, and then we come to understand it as structural. So that's something we talked about in the videos. And then our relationship to the narratives of movements actually help us either relive that pain or get excited with hope. So Beth, you've helped a bunch of different movements think about winning narratives. And for the folks here and for the folks listening online, can you talk to us a little bit about what should workplaces or employers pay attention to as those transformative worldviews start to take place or start to take hold?
So I want to speak to that specifically, but I want to back up for a moment, because Trina finished what she was talking about values. And I just want to emphasize that, because in movement work, in campaign work, wherever you're doing that, in the workplace, by voting, at a protest, we tend to talk about issues, and we don't tend to talk about values. And one of the things we learned in movement building is people don't vote on their issues, they vote on their values. And so one of the things I think we need to practice is talking about what we care about in values language, not issues language, right? Because that's what narratives and frames are about. It's connecting to people. We know what's wrong in the world. We know that what's happening in the world is violating our deepest held values. And then we talk about it as issues. Frankly, the issues are tactics. The issues are a way to get at our values. And so then we can fight about this issue versus that issue. Is it Medicare for all, or is it some other health plan? And what we're not talking about is, can we really care about each other? Are we interconnected in the way in which your health matters to my health? Is there an intersection in terms of how our identities are connected to each other? Is there a way in which we're completely interdependent? That if your family doesn't have food on the table, it means that my world is not as rich and as robust. Are we interdependent? We're not talking about our values, we're talking about our issues. And when we talk about our issues, we lose. Okay? Can I get a uh-huh?
Yeah.
We have to practice talking about our values, and then I want to talk about talking about our values in the workplace.
And Beth, thank you for saying that. How many folks here are part of an organization that have a vision or a values statement? You have some espoused values on your website, right? Cool, great. Our first question to you will always be, what do those values look like in your daily practice? So on a Thursday, in a meeting, I'm going to know you're living that value. How?
Right. And one of the things I often ask my clients is, do you know what your values are? Right? And then, because I think organizational value statements are the least used part of an organizational culture. And what do we always say? Culture eats strategy for lunch. Right? And if you're not living your values, you're not going to reach your strategies. And so as you're listening to the candidates and all their policies, listen for their values. See how well aligned those values are with the world you want to create. Campaigns tend to take, presidential campaigns now take you 2 years. Issue campaigns often take 9 months. Movements are 10 to 40-year projects. 10 to 40 years, and they're motivated by how well we're talking about our values. So to Alfonso's specific question, workplaces. One of the things that I've certainly observed, and if we take a minute, I'm sure you all have observed too, that a number of our workplaces, and whatever you feel about corporations, I just want to say, a number of our workplaces are well ahead of our governmental infrastructures on championing the social issues we care about. Right? And I'll give you some examples, right? Issues around inclusion of LGBT people, marriage equality, domestic partnerships, corporations and workplaces well ahead of the U.S. government in terms of that. Economic sustainability. Almost every single one of our Fortune 500 companies and our small employers have economic sustainability and climate change programs. Pay equity has often been championed by our workplaces well before it's been championed by our governments. Am I right about this? Right? Gender equality and gender neutral bathrooms, way ahead of a lot of our governments around this. So when we think about just to use the word capitalism, when we think about the intersection of a capitalistic democracy, which is sort of what we have, right? We often think about government as the place for our activism when it's often our workplaces and how we use the workplace values that the workplace says they care about to then push our workplaces into how are you going to live that value? What is it going to show up like in our workplaces every day? And then how is the power of the institution of the workplace then going to influence our other social systems? So as well as getting a paycheck, our workplaces are sources of activism, completely if we can tie it to the larger movement narrative that we're after. Can we see our workplaces as citizens, not people, right? But as citizens in a social change project where we can use the institutional power of those workplaces to amplify the values we most care about and hold them accountable when they're not. I have more to say, but I'll stop there.
So I know we have another planned question, but one of the things we hear a lot from our listeners on Behave is, okay, that's great, I'm motivated, I'm excited, what would my first move be? So for both of you, as you're talking about leveraging values, sort of workplace as a site of action, how would folks who are sort of feeling itchy or motivated begin using their workplace, leveraging those values?
So a number of our workplaces have employee resource groups, right? How many of your workplaces have any sort of employee resource group? A few of you, Okay. You can do that formally or informally. So the first thing I'd say is find other people, whether it's those water coolers or elsewhere, who care about the things you care about. And then what I would say is really a lot of what we know about organizing is we're doing one-on-ones. We're having individual conversations. And in addition to talking about the caucus, how'd you vote, whatever, talk about your values. Right? Everybody, go home tonight if you can and make a little list of what are the things I most care about and how are the things I most care about. So I'd start with what I most care about. Then how are the things I most care about being violated in the world right now? And spend a moment thinking about what would it look like if I lived in a world where those values were not being violated? What would it look like if I had a workplace where those values were not violated? And then figure out, remember what I said in the video about movements start with people you're connected to and then connected to others? Figure out 5 people you can talk to about the things you most care about and what the world would look like, what your workplace would look like if those things actually were lived out and aligned with your organizational values.
I'll offer a 3-part question that helps us get to how would we even begin or what is next when we are feeling captured in the enormity. It's just too big. We say, what do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? What do you want to do differently? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? What do you want to do differently? The reason we are profoundly hopeful about really flipping the script on inequity in our lifetime is that the good news is humans made the system that made the problem. So we can totally fix it. It is fixable. I'm not saying it's not huge. It's enormous. This is generations, decades, and centuries of a project of America that created a hierarchy of human value. If that feels fundamentally not okay to us, we start by saying, okay, for me, because again, Alfonso, you reminded us, what's our role? Because it's easy to point at HR, to point at the board, to point at the president and say, the culture should trickle down from the top. Trickle down's not real. Ronald Reagan made that up. It's not real. Okay?
And
so this
we
idea,
don't often want that stuff trickling on us.
No. I don't.
So, absolutely, we want your president and HR and your board doing their work too. No question. Nobody's off the hook. But you say, me. What do I want more of, less of, and to be done differently? And so before you go around asking folks for what they want, before you get grabby, you go ahead and say, I've done some thinking. I would like our dress code to be different in this way for this reason. Because here's how I think I'm getting treated differently as a woman in this workplace. When I think about how promotions work around here, it's not as transparent as I would like. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for a raise outside of my annual review. I don't know, right? So you can get really granular and say, I would like more information on this. I would like it done differently. So you start with, and it's vulnerable and it's scary to say, hey, I have some unmet needs. But what we always say is, it is your job to make asks and offerings. The asks need to be specific enough that people could actually meet your need. And the offerings are, I have a couple ideas. I don't know if this would work, but here's a couple ways I've been thinking about how we could make changes to the dress code, just for like a super specific example.
And I know, Beth, you want to get in here. I'm getting the card that we have to move to Q&A, so a quick thought from you, and then we'll want to hear from you all.
A quick thought. I want to say, fundamentally, it's my belief that our politicians are not leaders. They're followers. Elections can stop social change. It is up to us to motivate social change, right? So go out and vote for the values you believe in, and and do all the activism we need to do to make sure our values are the ones that people are going to have to follow.
I love being business owners because we don't have to pretend to be apolitical.
No, it's fine.
We're gonna
I'm
start.
never working at a nonprofit again.
We're this close to starting a PAC. You don't know. You don't know what's gonna happen.
So we want to hear from you. I think depending on how excited we are about our response to your question, maybe we have time for 2 or 3. I think there's mics roving around. So any questions about movement building? One up in front here. Please, and if you'll say your name with your question.
Hi, my name is Jamie Parker, and my question, one of the first things you said or asked is who has been to a march, who has been to an event, and then you kind of culminated in who is part of a movement. I personally don't consider myself to be part of a movement because I don't feel like I've earned it. I certainly consider myself an advocate and an ally, but I feel like sacrifice has to be part of the equation, and I'm just curious to hear how you feel about sacrifice as being a necessity.
And specifically, like, are allies part of the movement? If we have outsider status and we're organizing, are allies part of the movement?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I appreciate what you said about kind of when have we earned our way in, what is enough, right? And what we're gonna say is think about your values, think about your boundaries, think about your capacity. So when we think about, so for example, I physically don't have a ton of energy for direct action right now. I have it in my life, it's just not a thing. I don't feel good, right? When I'm out in the cold for long amounts of time. So what I am doing is giving money, right? What I am doing is getting on the phones, doing phone bank work. What I am doing is thinking about how I can contribute to a narrative. So part of what we were asking everybody to remember is that there is a whole slew of tactics to choose from that are incredibly impactful, but people keep just picking the hammer, right? They just keep thinking, because different tactics are hot at different moments, right? They just sort of gain attention. So whether it's direct action, whether it's one-on-one voter contact, whether it's a ton of op-eds, whether it's a social media sprint, right? Just all of it. We need all of it because we are trying to take over a narrative. And so you'll know when you feel like you have sacrificed or invested. I will say that participating in movements is uncomfortable. So the number of times I've slept in basements on people's floors to work on campaigns, it's a lot, but we are not into suffering. The whole reason we are doing this work is to make the suffering stop. And so boundaries are important. You get to decide today, how healthy am I? How well am I? How big of a movement have I built? So an example for me is when I was going through my divorce, I asked my friends to step up for me. I said, hey, the presidential election is happening right now. I'm down for the count. Can you all pull my weight for me? And they said yes.
So I agree with everything you say and disagree.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. Yeah. That's what happens in movements also. I want to problematize the concept of what we think being in a movement is and sacrifice, right? And also being an ally. Problematize both of those things. So first of all, let me just ask quickly, does anybody in this room feel like at the moment we are not sacrificing something about our values and way of life to be living in this social system, economic system at the moment? Let me ask another way. Do all of us feel like we're sacrificing something by living in this moment? Okay, so let's take sacrifice and living off basement floors, which I appreciate you did for years, out of the equation, right? Because we have this idea of what being in a movement is. And I want to reposition it as being in a movement is talking about our values, being willing to be in uncomfortable conversations where we're not hiding what we care about, where we're not just letting kids in cages go by without us saying that that violates our deepest held values. That we have to stand up and say what matters to us. And say it everywhere, even in uncomfortable moments. And so what I mean by, I have to say, I hate the word ally. Because what it says is, I am working towards your problem, rather than I am in solidarity with you because I cannot live in a world like this. And I think it's us living in that moment every single day, that's what being in a movement is. It's about, I am willing to stand in this moment because I cannot live in this world and not act.
We're gonna go like 90 seconds over. I know I'm getting the 2-minute card. Sorry, Jamie. I want one more question. I don't know how you identify, so what I'm about to say is not about who you are. I want to make sure that I hear from a woman and or a person of color in terms of a question.
We get both. My name is Mecca. I work at Eat for Equity Catering. Thank you. I had a question about what you said about making asks at work. So I'm really lucky to work at an organization where I can make asks. It took a long time for me to find a place like that. And I, most of the time, did not work at places like that. So my question is, when you work at an organization or a corporation where that kind of behavior is not valued, what about pushback? So I think it's really easy to say, well, make these small asks, say what's not working for you. And I can give you a really specific example of when I did that, and I got called into the big boss's office and got screamed at. And then I was kind of marked for the rest of my tenure there. So I just wonder, you make the ask, and then you get pushback, and this is your way of putting food on the table, then what?
Thank you for naming that. It's something that is true about my personal experience. I'm going to take this question.
You get to do that.
So as queer folks, as folks of color, as folks who might be women or trans folks, there's risk. There can be risk or danger to our livelihood, our safety, or how we're perceived in the workplace when we're making those asks. No doubt, no question. I think that having a team of folks, having whether it is, Beth was talking about resource groups, a group of peers to fall back on. And I think the conversation might be, there's a group of us that are noticing a pattern that's not working for our group. And it's in my awareness that this workplace has said, you want everybody to be, often it gets said, I was like, we want all kinds of people to be successful here, or bring your whole self to work, or we want to be an equitable workplace where people can really thrive. And so helping our workplace understand that there's a whole group of us who are hearing what you're saying, and we want to believe it, and the patterns of behavior, we feel like we're bumping into them. We feel like we love the words, and we're not seeing the behavior that aligns. So I think sometimes asking folks who are sharing the experience or who are those accomplices, who are those folks who are part of the dominant culture, who see it and believe it, who when you tell them, they say, yes, I believe that experience, or maybe I'm just noticing it now that you brought it to my attention, and can their voices be leveraged, right? So do I have a community of folks who see the pattern with me, experience the pattern with me, and then are there accomplices part of the dominant culture that can also name it and say, yeah, I'm not experiencing that personally, but I absolutely believe that this is the experience of that group of folks.
And the more you can do that in the language of the organizational's values, the more dissonance you cause for them.
So that's our time for today. We would love to invite you wherever you get your podcasts to begin tuning in to Behave, or feel free to go into our back catalog of season 1. It all still feels pretty relevant. On Twitter, we're at Behave Podcast. We want to give a special thanks to Pollen for having us. We are always so grateful to Levi, our producer. And Beth, where can folks find you?
So I'm not so cool to be on Twitter. But my website, which is essentially bethzemsky.com, it was on the video. And I also have a podcast that goes more deeply into movement building, if you're interested in that. And all the back episodes are cataloged on my website. And you can subscribe to the podcast there, bethzemsky.com.
We'll have Alfonso give our signature send-off. Otherwise, our online listeners will get confused.
Thanks for hanging out. Make good choices. Behave is produced by Levi Weinhagen in Studio G at the Glenn Nelson Center. All of my childhood Ricky Lake, Sally Jesse Raphael dreams are coming true right now.